sorry about that. We lost the internet connection. We continue onwards and upwards. Let's get the screen share. That's particularly annoying given that we were just getting into some interesting questions about the metaprogramming homework. Let's go right back there. So we were talking about, there's a Paul here with me in the office in London, and he was saying that in the metaprogramming examples that he'd seen in the Ruby Pickaxe book, he hadn't seen class eval mentioned so much. I guess I do have certainly at least had the Ruby Pickaxe book on my machine. I would like to find that quite. Usually, if I type Ruby, that comes up. If it doesn't, that's annoying. I find this Ruby search thing really annoying. Yeah, I guess I'm not going to find it easily. I guess what was that you were mentioning Ruby metaprogramming? Which methods? You're like class eval? No, class eval was the one you were saying wasn't mentioned so much. Instance eval.
Instance variable set.
Ah, okay. Like so.
There is module eval as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole series of different metaprogramming things there. I guess can we get here we go. This is from somewhere online. So, you know, we've got instance eval, module eval, class eval. So we have the other ones that you were mentioning there. Instance variable get, instance variable set. Yeah. These kind of things. So there's a lot of different stuff that we can do. I guess in the first instance, though, for the kind of functionality that we want to achieve here, we don't. I don't think that these kind of methods are sufficient for what we want to do. Like, what we kind of want to do here is that we need to kind of create, like, in order to talk about the history, we need to kind of create a sort of a space for that to happen in. So if we go and look at the process here is, like, again, if we go back to the, you know, in particular, it's looking for, you know, being able to set this method. If we look here, what it's done, where is it at the top of the thing, it's, for this test case, we've set up these two classes. We want to be able to define the class in such a way that each instance will have this method on it here. So when we talk about doing class eval, then we, you know, in here we've used attribute reader to make sure that the individual instances will be able to, you know, get things with method name foo. Like if we see that the flow from there is test class 1 equals 2, we've called attribute accessor with history. We're passing in a symbol there. So attribute name there, you know, either way around, we make sure that it's a string, and then we set that attribute. So now we're going to have a reader for foo, but we haven't got a writer. And we could have done, you know, attribute accessor here, but we kind of want to override the behavior of the writer. So we want to get started with something here like, it's not let me do the, I need to use the, I can't put the pound symbols in there. So what we want here is, and because we're inside this percentage Q, it means we're inside a string, and we can do a string interpolation. We want to do, you know, in order to go about defining this, this is a writer in a certain way, and then adding various bits of functionality in. You know, we kind of need to do it using this. I mean, did you look at some of the other alternatives and think, oh yes, maybe I should have been using this, that, or, you know, some of the other things from here?
Yeah, I initially started using this variable set. Never forget it to work, and then I did.
Right.
What you were doing.
Yeah.
Then it
Sure. Yeah, and I guess that's because, if we look at something like this with the instance variable, that was its variable get there. If we've got set somewhere as here. Basically, this is kind of like a long-winded way of setting a variable as something in the situation where, we're kind of, we're just adding an instance. After they've been created using instance variable sets. So we've got an object here of a Rubyist. Yeah, I mean, this I think is interchangeable with, like, if I just take that and pop it over here, like if we just had this down here. So we're doing that on some object. That's, if that object is, let's just kind of grab, I don't know, we've got some kind of class thing end, and then we've got object is equal to thing new, like so. Then if we, we could, the other thing we could do is we could open up class thing, and we could say, oh yeah, I want you to have, I want to have a new instance variable. We could kind of do attribute. What do we want here? We're setting the instance variable to something. Yeah, I guess it's not quite the same thing. I guess in their example it already has a, yeah. Yeah, so this one here, all right, okay, it's not, I was thinking that we were trying to, so one of the things we can do is we can add, we can add new instance variables after the fact, right, by reopening the class and adding new stuff to it. This one is kind of basically in the absence of an attribute accessor or an attribute writer, we can kind of reach in and get this done, even though, arguably we shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. Right. Yeah. But so this is just a question of, as I think you're probably following now, a question of being able to set the instance variables if we don't have access to it. I mean, another way to achieve the same thing is we could open the class, say that we do this, and then subsequently we could say object country is equal to Japan after having made it accessible to us. But this then makes it accessible to everybody. So on, so on, so on. But so in this case, it's not enough simply just to create the writer, as it were, and that's what this is. And we could just, this would be the process of just, if we said like we want to create the writer, then we would do, we're just making the writer without doing anything else. Oh yeah, this should also have like value there. This would be using class eval just to create a writer with this attribute name. It would be the same as, and if we now just drop, if we now just, I mean, the other thing, of course, that's potentially confusing here is that we're actually opening up class, which is like the high level, all of the objects kind of descend from this, so that everything, we're kind of like hacking Ruby to add new functionality throughout, which some people are like, ooh, that's like crazy scary. But so we, this code now here would be the same as we've added the method for say that we knew we wanted to do a particular attribute name for food, right? But now what we've done is by using the class eval, we've made it dynamic with regard to this attribute. And we could also have done ATR writer attribute name. So that's like a specific thing, but to do, I guess, for an exact match, these two are identical. And so now that we've done this, we can start to say, or the reason, because we don't do this is because this by itself wouldn't give us any control of additional things that would happen in the background. We can, you know, come in here and start playing around with other stuff and say, oh yes, maybe let's store some values, and like so. So yeah, does that help at all?
That helps. Yeah.
Cool. We've got a full house. Any questions from the room? We've got the Hangouts. I think I've got my audio on. I see Nate has joined us. Great to have you with us, Nate. We've got Johannes. Feel free to ask in the group chat there. We've got KS. I guess somebody's typed random characters into the keyboard to achieve an anonymity in G+. Good on you. I think anonymity was important. You want it. So I'm not hearing. I guess I will check all the others. Try and now check that all the other sources or possible sources of questions.
If there are no questions, I think you can just go on with discussing the homework too.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I know that I missed a lot of questions last week, you know, and saw them after the event. So I'm just trying to be doubly sure that I've caught them if they're around. Yeah. So okay. Well, I guess to close up then on the metaprogramming, I think the other thing that I would say is that you don't need to be able to do metaprogramming of this thing every day of the week, even almost like you may go. Some of us may already be, but if one goes on to you know, write lots of Rails apps or Sinatra apps or other things, you know, you don't need to know about this. This is the kind of stuff that behind the scenes allows Rails and other things to do their magic. And so part of the reason it's being introduced here is just to give you, oh, okay, that's how that magic happens. But maybe you didn't know. Anyway, I noticed KS Julius is saying, oh, that's demonetize. Basically, what we did right now is recreated an attribute setter, correct? Yes. Is it not called attribute writer rather than attribute setter?
It's writer.
Writer, yeah. So, but yes, I don't know if we can also use attribute setter. But yes, you're absolutely right. Demonetize this class eval here without anything else in it is just the same as this. But now, having done it this way, that gives us an opportunity to get in here and start fiddling around with what was the old value and put up ways to get on, so on and so forth. So, okay. So yes, I found a question. I guess there's also. Oh, where's my mouse gone? There is also the Q&A thing, which I'm opening. Okay, that doesn't seem to be any questions there yet. Okay, so that was homework 1. Certainly, I think this is the trickiest part of homework 1. Let's go on and talk about homework 2, which is tricky in different ways. So we've got homework 2 is now. So we've had our introduction to Rails. We've got our Rails intro. So yeah, I mean, there's various things here as well as dealing with Rails. There's also starting to need to deal a bit more with Git, and also starting to deal with Heroku. And one of the things, I mean, I think this is my general suggestion to people. I guess we've got some audio leakage there from somebody. We've got Talib says, I think we must understand how this metaprogramming works. We need to understand how Rails works. Yes, I mean that's an interesting point, and I think Armando is probably very sympathetic with your. Yeah, I'll try and work out. Did anybody tell me who is the person who's got the audio? Is that Petra? Yeah, I think it is. Oh, no.
Vince, I think he's the only one left.
Yeah, I'll just muting people there. Okay, so I think, you know, one of the things that Armando hears a lot from his students is, you know, you see this Rails stuff and it's like, it's magic, what's all this crazy magic thing that's happening? And I think that is one of the things that prompted in particularly Armando to focus on the metaprogramming and try and introduce that. I don't know about anybody else. For me, you know, when I first started learning Rails way back, this is like 2005 or something, and it was a very early version of Rails, I don't know that I was bothered by the magic part of it. It was like, I've been given this thing and it works in this way. If it works reliably in this way, superficially, I don't care. If it, I can do it 10 times and it keeps on doing it, okay, yes, I can move away from PHP kind of thing. Although, Rails has also its own, I mean, not that PHP has got, but yeah, I think different people will have different levels of comfort with just working on top of a kind of a magic inverted codes system like Rails versus just sort of saying, okay, well, if it works that way, fine, I'll go on. So, yeah. Anyhow.
Yeah, because it seems like...
one more thing is that, like...
somebody cool just asking questions. Go on.
Because, like, you try to, function trying to find something or whatever.
Right. On the fly, it is, yeah. Yeah, indeed. And that can be disconcerting. And I think it is helpful to see how Rails can handle that messing and so on. So what was your, Pretty, what were you saying?
Yeah, what I was saying is, like, for the beginner course that we are doing here, we are not really going into the depth and details of Rails, so then it's not really necessary to know metaprogramming. But when you go into the advanced details of Rails, like let's say if you want to pursue go into study of Rails, then I mean the whole, like, most of the framework of Rails is built on metaprogramming. So in that point, like, as in the scope of this course, I don't think it's really important to learn metaprogramming.
No, well, I think again it's going to be people different individuals are going to have different levels of comfort with these things, and so some people will want to know more about metaprogramming so that they can feel comfortable with Rails. But in principle, at least to use Rails, you're not required to know metaprogramming. Just for people who might be worried that I'm going to have to now do loads of metaprogramming. I noticed also Johannes is asking a question about pair programming. It's been using Bitbucket, but we're asking for Heroku. Would we submit the same repo? And Vitaly was already answering, but yeah, the Bitbucket is storage, Heroku is for hosting. You can carry on using Bitbucket for all of your stuff. You can in fact have your local Git repository can point to both Heroku for hosting to Bitbucket for storage. You can have your local Git repositories, point to both Bitbucket and GitHub repos, and you can push your code into both places. And Johannes is saying, yeah, but you would remotely push to Heroku. So you can do that. I mean, I'm not quite sure what you mean by remotely push to Heroku. You can be on Cloud9 or Nitrous and be doing, pushing Heroku. But basically, Heroku is just another, I guess, I wonder if I've done it from, let's just go and have a look if I've got, oops, let's see if I've got the Rails intro Git remote -v. Yeah, I mean, so if we look here, this is my local repository. I'm able to talk to a Heroku repository, but it doesn't really matter that I'm local. I could be on Cloud9, I could be on Amazon Web Services, I could be on Nitrous. Any machine with a Git repository can have a link to a remote Heroku repository. It can also have a link to a remote GitHub repository, and it could have a link to a remote Bitbucket repository. It's all flat in that regard. And so, independently of whether you might have stored your Rails intro code, you might have cloned it off of GitHub and pushed it onto Bitbucket, but that is independent. It's totally orthogonal to the ability to push it. You would still be, from whichever platform you're doing, you'd be doing git push Heroku master in order to push to your Heroku instance. So yeah. And then I've got the Dynamo size is saying, and metaprogramming is in part what makes Ruby dynamic. So provided that we want to use Ruby in the way it is intended, we should definitely familiar ourselves with meta. I mean, in the long term, being familiar with Ruby's metaprogramming abilities will make you a better Ruby programmer. And Vitaly is saying, and Git, yeah, Git, I think, can't remember enough how good that is. And so Johannes is saying, so two students pairing use the same Heroku repository. I think what we actually say in the code, in the instructions, is on submission, is the idea that you would both, you can in principle, if you're both working on the code together, you can, ping pong on it, or whatever mechanism you do it, or you're both doing it on a C9 instance, but ideally you will create your own instance of on Heroku. And that's, everybody, you can just check out the, finally if you've got it working, you'd get the Heroku, you get the code working on your own Heroku instance, and then submit that link, ideally. I guess, I hope it's clear why that's, like, for example, since you mentioned Bitbucket, Johannes, you might be doing ping pong over Bitbucket, right? So you'd have, a Bitbucket repo, or two, and you'd be sharing the code backwards and forwards over that. But you'd also have a local copy of the code, or the code where you're doing the development, which might be on the Cloud9 or in Amazon hosted or wherever it happens to be. Ultimately, even as you're pairing backwards and forwards, at the end of the day, independently of each other, you can still just push your code. You can both independently push the same code to different Heroku instances, and you just create a new Heroku instance if you haven't got one already by doing Heroku create, and then you get stuck with like key SSH hell if you're unlucky. If not, you just sail through it, and there you go. Yeah, I hope that answers Johan's question. Happy to get more into that later as necessary. Great welcome to Ben for joining us. Yeah, Vince mentioning the Git remote -v, which we ran there and seeing the different remotes. But yeah, all very relevant to homework too. Yeah, and so one of the things that we've kind of worked carefully to polish, because it's the kind of things that people do often get stuck on, is this process of deploying to Heroku and making it work. You can very easily, if you dive into the homework and get it all working locally, you can spend a lot of time to get the 3 different pieces of this working, and then finally, in order to get your grade, you want to push to Heroku and then get stuck there. So that's partly why it's a big struggle. Before you dive into the ins and outs of Rails in the rest of the homework, I give you this. Right, let's make sure that we can get it running locally. That's in getting run Rails, even just with the skeleton. Before we make any changes, let's see if the skeleton works on your machine. Then there's let's make sure that we're logged into Heroku properly. And this, if you're working on the fresh VM, I'm now, because we've done it so many times, fairly confident that this should be a fairly smooth run for you on the VM. However, if you're on your own machine or you've been using the VM for other deployments or whatever, and maybe you have GitHub SSH keys in there, it can get sticky. That's yeah. Also, if you're on C9 or Nitrous, I think you need to install the Heroku tool belt as well. But then, yeah, so we run through here. I guess, does anybody have any questions about, specifically about the Heroku deploy, the Heroku logs, the Heroku, I mean, this is, I think, conceptually quite challenging thing here, which is that you have, you can have a local instance running on your machine or on your cloud-hosted thing that you're doing development on, where you have a database and you have put data into that. Then for the deployment, you use Git to push that code up into the Heroku hosting service, and then that has a separate database that you then have to rerun the same commands on in order to get things all working. I think that's often something I see people getting stuck on. Johannes is saying, I thought all remotes in Git would be repos. And Vince is saying that they are, which indeed they are. If we go back to looking at the list of remotes here, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing actually is that these other repositories don't have to be remote. They could be on the local machine, just in a different part of the file system. Every Git repo is created equal, and as long as you have an unambiguous way of specifying the location of that Git repo, then you can communicate with it. Whether you have access permissions to it is a whole other story. But this is, I think, Linus Torvalds' gift to the world there, that he's got this system where there is no special quality associated with any one Git repo. And Johan's asking, do Heroku deployments expire? They don't appear to. Heroku, obviously a private company. Who knows if they'll ever introduce a policy where they start pruning out the old stuff. I think if you don't have a credit card registered with Heroku, you have a maximum of 5 that you can create. Somebody's also adding, they do go to sleep if you don't use them. So they kind of Heroku basically anything that's not in product is not recently active. It will sort of take it off, and you'll notice when you hit Heroku instances that it takes like the first time 15 seconds maybe to get through, and then if you keep using it within the space of an hour, it's pretty nippy. But then if you come back to the next day, the first load up will be slow. Yeah. Cool. Okay. I feel well, despite the internet crash earlier, I feel like we're kind of we're talking meaningful things. To chat. Let's see if we have anything. No questions in the Q&A there. I'm not. Oh, let me see if there's anything in the other world chat. Okay, and then finally, let's look up over here. Okay, that was going to new Hangout. This is the other one. Other place. Okay, so that's all. You know, and we can. You know, people think of other questions related to Heroku and Git and so on. We can do those again. Yeah, I don't think we've got any questions there. So then we come into assuming that we've, you know, you can have gone through this process of, right, I've cloned the root repo, I've made it running locally, I've dealt with the Heroku issues, I've pushed it up, and it's working on Heroku. And I think that's a lovely, that's just a lovely thing to just, like, when it works, and sometimes it doesn't, but when it works, and that's a fair proportion of the time, it's lovely because you just have this, right, I had this stuff that I was working on locally, I pushed it out to the cloud, and now I've got a URL that I can share with anybody in the world. And even if there's nothing else that you take away from this course, I think it's the ability to deploy by Git your code to some remote service. You know, that's, you know, huge. You can put your prototype up and show it to the world, and who knows who wants to look at it, but you can do it.
Yeah, one more thing is like.
Yeah. So you say too much in catastrophic. Oh yeah, and there's a lot of. And I'd say actually, we just moved one of our main projects from Heroku to Ninefold, and that actually, you don't even have to do any of this. You just give it your GitHub repo, and it, boom, you know. So Ninefold, thank you for your support there. It's they unfortunately don't have a free tier, so that's downside there. But anyway, sorry, I'm pretty.
One more thing is, yeah, like if someone is having problems with like some Heroku deployment or something, then like he or she can host his website in like C9 or Nitrous and submit that URL, and that should work as well.
That's right. We did actually check that. Yes, we did. I do believe I did the whole of this or very similar homework on Cloud9, and so Cloud9 also allows you to run your code, and it, you know, allows you to create a URL endpoint. So although we kind of recommend Heroku, that's what we've got the instructions for. Actually, any cloud hosting service that what's the word? Any cloud hosting service that provides a URL that gives you that Rails interface, which you know, I think we've got screenshots of in the next section, like here. I probably actually, if I just go and look here, if I do Heroku open here, I probably find yeah, this is one of my. I have many of these now, actually, as you see one earlier. There is the same one there. But anything that provides this interface, this Rails app, I mean, even in principle, you will, if you run it on your local machine and you had got set up with your service provider so that you had a permanent IP address, you could, in principle, as long as you left your computer on, submit this, and when the grid will come in, and then it will like test on your local machine. But yeah, so good point. There, sound pretty. Let's go on over here. The more, let's see. Yeah, okay. So let's go over here. So then, I mean, then we've got a sort of a sequence of things to do, which are all about enhancing the interface, really. And I think in my, you know, intro. Movie help video thing, I showed, and I think here, how to add a link title. You know, that was sort of the first step in the way. I think one of the potentially most challenging things here, did I say this already? I think Haml is quite challenging. I know that many people prefer Haml because there's less elements there. I just find it myself.
Yeah, but I would say like for beginners, ERB is the best.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there, Sempriti, and I'm going to try and convince Armando of that. We'll see if that works. I mean, I think Hamel's got some things going for it, but I think working out the ins. I think that in particular, as we go on, there's sort of important things like ensuring that certain elements have IDs in them. That I think you want to be carefully looking at the link to documentation in Rails to work out exactly how to get, IDs and classes to appear in the right parts of your HTML. Yeah, I think indeed Johan's saying it's easier with the ARB when you come from something like PHP, and I would agree. I mean, I think it's more that I would say almost everybody. Maybe I'm broadly generalizing here, has at least a passing familiarity with HTML, And so if you've got what's basically an HTML document, there's kind of like, okay, you can know, I want to have an ID in this tag, so you can write ID equals and so on. It's not obvious how to do that in Haml, and so that's another hurdle. That I think understanding Haml is a great great to be able to do that. Yeah, I was going to go back here. So yeah, any questions about any other part? This was only released on Sunday. People are not necessarily that far through it. Any other questions or issues?
Yes, Sam, actually I have a question. Can you please talk about ways how we can debug our Rails application? Because
Yes, go on.
yeah, debugging application. Can we do something, some debugger,
Yes.
or we must print values to screen? How can we debug
Yes,
Rails?
so you can do things with the debugger, and that's a great thing because I think it's very important for people. It's also something that I know how to show you, and so yes. So what we could do, for example, I mean, it almost. So we, as I think I showed in here, we made this link do something, and what we could do if we go over, like so. Okay, we've got it going to there. What we might do is say, well, let's have it, or let's at the moment I was having it hitting the root, which is just like not very useful or important or valuable. What I might just do here is do rate roots like so, and have a look at ways into the application. So for example, if I want to go to the movies index, basically it's movies. So any of these things I can pop underscore path on the end, and then I will get the right path out. I could have done the quotes and slash movies, as Amanda mentioned. That's kind of hard coding your roots in there, which is frowned upon. But so I'm going to do that. I'm also going to, I guess what I'm going to do is, let's before we get into a debug method, let's just run Rails S like that. Let's go and look at, this is my local host here. Let's just check superficially that the functionality is working. I'm going to click movie title. Right, yeah, so movie title is now pointing to /movies there. Johan is asking, would Rails have a folder for .spec files? Yes, we'll see later on how you'll have, ultimately, when you're building Rails app, you won't be doing it like this. You'll have a feature folder, a spec folder. You'll be writing your cucumbers in the feature folder, your specs in the spec folder, and you'll be driving the creation of this kind of functionality in Rails through a acceptance test, unit test flow. If I had my way, we'd start with the acceptance tests because I worry that a lot of people come into this course and they get as far as Rails and they say, oh, I can deploy to Heroku, and that's it. We sort of lose them there, and you don't get onto the later homeworks, it's homework 3 and homework 4, that are all about Cucumber and RSpec and so on. And anyway, I'll try and drag myself back. I mean, we can talk about it more later. I'll drag myself back to just dealing with Rails, how we might debug it. So, I've now got this link set up to do something there. I think we're supposed to be sourcing the thing in terms of the movie title. I guess I could, just for fun, I could, what if I want movies path here? I don't know if I even remember. If I want to put params on the movie path, do I have to pass it a variable that says something like, oh, I don't know, like, is it like sort equals, is it like, I don't do this so regularly. I'm just going to do this briefly, and it's probably going to break. And I show you that partly because I think it's good to see things break. Let's see, and what we do here. No, okay. Yep. So I don't know if people can see, it's a bit small at the bottom left of the screen. So that process allowed me to pass some things in there. Now, if I click it, it's going to do this. At the moment, we haven't set up any functionality, so it comes in there. It's reloaded the page with that. But so we might say, okay, we might have been writing code and whatever. Let's say that we want to debug the point at which that is incoming. So let's go and have a look. So this is one of the things. It's like, probably everybody was able to identify this file because I showed it to you. And so, one of the things that we need to all learn about Rails is, okay, given that we've got that link, and from the browser we hit Rails with it, what's the entry point into the code? And so, pretty much, assuming that the root is in place, the entry point that you're looking for is in a controller. So, movies path here, we saw on rate routes, or at least I guess I've run it after having run rate routes. Oh, there we go. It corresponds to the movies. So this is what this is telling us here is movies controller index method. So let's go and have a look. We've got our movies controller, and we've got an index method here. So, what we can do, and it might take a few steps here, is I think we've already got Debugger set up in gem files. What we can do is, for example, put a debug statement in there. And we'll see if this works the first time around. I could do that, and we'll see. Oh, it's stuck. It's stuck spinning. Why is it stuck? Is the internet down again? No. What's happened is, if we go down to the bottom here, we've hooked it on the debugger, which I really like. I mean, I think it's dangerous to be overly dependent on a debugger. I really particularly like, and I'll show you this maybe in the coming help videos, I really like using the debugger in combination with tests. So you have a test, and you're trying to get stuff to do stuff, and you're not sure what's happening. You use a debug breakpoint to make things work, or at least to try and understand what's going on. And the lovely thing about this, I'm not sure, did Armando show this? I think Armando should let there's like a minus debugger tag. Basically, I think the way we've got it set up, you just write the word debugger in there, and you'll get, in your console, the debugger thing there. What we can do here is we can have a look at this one. So just a word about the debugger here. So this sort of text debugger, there are also graphical debuggers. So for example, the RubyMine IDE that I use has quite a nice debugger in there, although I often have trouble getting it to work with my more complex projects, but that's another story. This text-only debugger here is it's giving us here a little overview of the point of the code that it's up to. So this, like those lines in there, if we go and look at, oh no, wrong thing, sorry. If we go and look at the code over here, it's basically saying, hey, you're at this point in the code. And in particular, this little equals, greater than here is telling us if we moved on, this is the next thing we would run. So we have yet to run movies equals movies all. We can do movies there and see that that's nil. We can also, what I did there was the params. All of the variables that are available to the controller are available to us here. So we can see here actually in the params that sort method, or that key value pair, with sort being equal to true, is I can see, okay, right, that's visible there. One thing is with the debugger, never put the debugger at the very end of the method, because what happens is basically it doesn't work. It kind of ends up going on to the next thing. It tries to go to execute the next line, and then you end up in this weird sort of no man's space. Always put your debugger, I would say, often put it at the start of the method. Just make sure that there's at least one line of sensible Ruby code after your debugger statement. general rule to avoid getting stuck. So in this case, rather than executing forward, and there is, if you type help here, there's a list of different things to do. You can sort of step through different, like I'm familiar people are with debuggers, but it allows you to halt execution of the running code and then potentially restart or step through or step into methods and step out of methods and so on and so on. I often find that I don't use that functionality so much as I just want to get stopped at this point and I want to check what some of the data is there. And then once I see, oh, it's an array, then I'm like, oh, well, I should have been calling this method. The other lovely thing here is that, and I love this, I just totally love this, the feedback loop, particularly if you've got tests, is so much tighter here, particularly if you're trying to like work out the syntax or something. Here, you've got all of the data set up, and ideally you're being driven by a test, so you've got the data set up there, but you're coming in through the live code. And so, I mean, for example, I can just take this code here, and I can run, oops, there was a place, is it? Where is it? If I press it correctly, Control-C, Control-V. No, you're not going to let me. Oh, all right, I'm going to have to type it. Brilliant. Okay. Anyway, but I can do like this. And so this is like a full, I have access to everything the controller does here. So even before it's actually been run, I can check that movies equals movie.all does the thing that I expect it to do. And it certainly looks like it does there. It seems to have populated the movies instance variable with the appropriate stuff. And so I could even start here saying, oh, what if I wanted to get all these movies and if I wanted to sort them? Like say that I've got movies and then I said something like sort, what would that do? Maybe we'd want to do something like, I don't know if this is actually the right thing really, but I want to compare the titles because we want to sort by title, let's say. There we go. I might do something like that. Or I don't know, maybe I want to do something else where I kind of do movies is equal to movie dot and then I don't know about the. So I mean, there's an active record mentioned here. If I still my SQL brain wants me to do. Can I just? I think I can do all and then sort. Possibly, can I even do this? No. And that's the kind of thing. I don't spend so much of my time there. Like, if we go and have a quick. Oh, I think you're right. Actually, yeah, good call. That's why I love pair programming. Right, yeah. Can I do dot order title? Yeah, that was right. Cool. Yeah. And so I can kind of like the particularly annoying thing sometimes is that you're busy making. I mean, the particularly annoying thing sometimes is you're making these changes in the code, right? And you have to go back out to the browser and I mean, that's much better than it used to be because Rails also reloads the code for you, so you can quickly check change. But it's still an extra step. If you've got and you're driving it with tests, then you've got to go and rerun the test suite. Maybe all test is running, but it's still there is nothing faster than like here. Instead of me having written this in the whole app code, reloaded, hit from the browser page, seen that it didn't work, go back, go forward, spend half an hour of my life lost. I can be here in the debugger. This is the right one. This one works in this context. Let's take that. Oh, wrong thing. If you can copy and paste. Oh, no, it's Control-Shift-C, isn't it? That's right. And go back. And now I want to stick that code in there, right? And I'm like, yes. There you go. So Vince was all right. Can you rewind a little bit, please? Starting from scratch with Rails server off. What do you do to get into the console to poke around? And Vitel is replying saying, put debugger in your code, run server Rails S, open page, go to console. And having just made that change in the code, I'll go back and start again. So I've changed that code so that it now, actually what I'll just do, just to, often you'll get stuck on this as well, is I'll get rid of the debug statement just for the moment. Let's just what I also do is I'll do continue here, which allows the thing to go on. Oh, I think it broke stuff. I'll have to restart the server. I think if you leave it hanging for too long, it just kind of gives up in frustration. And so what we can come back into here and go to movies and reconnect. And in fact, now we can see it has sorted it in a different way, right? So that's, we can immediately see the impact of those changes. But so this is the process, right, for doing debugging. The Rails server was, we'll see if this works with. So Vince, the server is running. I didn't do anything special, right? The server is just running, yeah? I went here and I put the word debugger at the point in the code that I want the console to pop up, okay? So I'm going to save that file, right? I'm making sure that I have at least one line of sensible Ruby code after the debugger, yeah? I'm now going to come back to the browser and I'm going to do whatever action in the browser will hopefully hit that debug point, right? If I've got my setup right, like in this case, I've set up this link and it is going to enter into that method in the controller, when I now click it, we're going to notice it's spinning and spinning and spinning and saying waiting for localhost. And I might think, oh, I've broken it. But if I go to the terminal, I see it's hooked on the debugger again. Yeah, and so this is the point of the console. So, Vince, is that now clear what we did, the steps that we did there in order to get to the console point? So yeah, Vince is saying he's got it. Yep, yep, yep. And Johan's asking about, what about debug at movies or at movies.inspect? So if I'm using the debugger like this, I find that I don't really need to use debug at movies or movies.inspect. When I very first started with Rails and I didn't really understand how the debugger works, I would use methods like that to print, I might print out all of what the movies were like in my Rails template. So I might kind of do something like, if we go and look at the view, like I might have been like fiddling around with this method here, trying to get the ordering right, failing. Oh, is that the right thing? I don't know. I would kind of be going into here, and usually I wouldn't be in Haml. I'd be in ERB, and I'd be trying to do something like this, debug. What would I be doing? Yeah, at movies, like this. And I'd be saving that, and I'd be saying, "Oh, thank God! I'm so pleased that I'm on the debugger here." Well, let's go back and let the debugger continue for the moment. In this case, I didn't leave it running too long. It's okay. Here, this is me now printing out all this data, and so this used to be my debug loop before I knew about the debugger, because I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I kind of I made a change. Was that no? Okay, I'm not sure." Okay, I don't have to restart the server. That's better than PHP, or at least it was back in 2005. So that's cool. I love that. And now, okay, is that what I wanted? I'm not sure. And then I would kind of go back and I'd fiddle with this and I'd reload this until I got what I wanted, kind of thing, right? But now I'm like, I just don't need that at all. Really, I never do this anymore. I'm like totally, don't do that. I'm all over. Let's do this, but ideally driven by a test. So hopefully that answers Johan's. And I think at movies.inspect and debug at movies that just produce nicely formatted output. One of the things I do sometimes get irritated by, if we now go and get hooked back on the debugger, like so, is that if I just do at movies here. Oh, let's do this. It's not very easy to read, and I'm often a bit stuck for what is it that I need to do to make this a bit nicer to read? Because in the debug environment, I don't know. I mean, most of the time I can just dive down into the data that I want. There is this pretty print thing. This is the kind of thing that, yeah, I mean, what I would tending to be doing is kind of like, oh, that looks kind of sucky. I'll just grab, oh, I want to look at the third one and just use that. I'm sure, hopefully, the great brain of MOOC, the distributed brain of all the students, might, as they have with Pry, which I hadn't used before, and some students mentioned it, and it's great. But Pry, I love. You get it's like IRB, but you get color syntax highlighting as you work, which would be nice here too. But so I tend to. That doesn't. There's also, you can say IRB here, which kind of sometimes I have found staying in this RDB environment here. I don't know. I think it's maybe with the latest version of Debugger, it's got more flexible. Sometimes in the past, it seemed like I had to get into IRB in order to inspect the data. Johannes is asking, how does Pry work with Rails server? And the answer, Johannes, I don't know that it does. Although, I guess in principle, I could try it. I mean, at least here in IRB, let's just see what happens if I do @movies. Yeah. No, none of these are pretty good. I can now leave IRB and go back to the debugger, which is a different environment where I've got my help. I could try Pry. No. I don't. Is IRB? Yeah, see, I think IRB is an option that's built into the debugger. I mean, you can say like help IRB. There we go, and it tells us, IRB starts an interactive debugger as an interactive Ruby session. Okay, IRB is extended in the. Okay, yeah. I mean, recently with the latest version of the debugger, where it's very easy to view all of the variables, I haven't found myself needing to drop into the IRB there, and I've just stayed in this. Oh, that's like yes, and go back to. Oh, no, I exited the debugger, which I didn't mean to do. Oh well. So this is, and you get confused. So basically, I just don't go into the IRB there so much. I don't know if I ever go to gem install. Have I got Pry here? I guess I could. I do have Pry. Yeah. So here you can do things like def hello puts hello like so, and then n, and you see it automatically gets syntax highlighting. Syntax colorizing, which is nice. But that's, yeah, it's interesting there. It looks like, I wonder if I just go back, so this would have kind of like crashed and gone, oh, that just broke because I killed the debugger mid-flow, and that shut the server down. And it was like, yeah. But so if we go back over here, oh, and then switch on the debugger again. Okay. So I could even try require, I mean, this I'm just going, this is like crazy stuff. No, anyway, I'm sure, hopefully some interested party will watch this and say, yes, we really should make Pry work in the Rails debugger, but anyway. So that was originally, it was started off by Vitaliv's question about how to do debugging and get things working. I mean, the other critical thing, of course, is, let's just go and say continue here, is being able to go in here and, oops, let me do that, say inspect elements, and then be able to go in and look at exactly what's going on in here. And so on. That's the other critical. I mean, that's really HTML, CSS debugging, but yeah, totally important. Are there any other questions on the Rails homework? I guess we'll do like the little rounds of everybody else. We've got so Johannes is asking Hamel how to add IDs, which is, as I mentioned earlier on, is kind of can be tricky. I mean, I think often with these kinds of things, it's, I don't know, I'm just kind of in the background there checking if, anyway, but so what, I never, particularly because I don't use Hamel very much, I never remember how you put IDs in Hamel, but I would do something like Hamel HTML IDs, and I'd go and say, how do I make dynamic IDs in Hamel? I guess Is that not quite specific enough? HTML ID. How to add HTML ID to Rails form tag. How to add ID to form tag. Let's just go and have a look in there, and we see I'm trying to add an ID to my form tag. This works. Look, we've got movies path there, comma, method, ID, form ID. And I mean, the key thing really here is if we're trying to add, if we go back and look at it, where are we adding our IDs? We're saying that the link for sorting by title should have the HTML element ID title header. So the interesting thing and this, I don't know if this may be not immediately intuitive, but if we go and look at our hammer, we see that it's this method here, this Rails helper method, that's creating the link for us. If we go and look here, though, the way this appears in here, it's just HTML. Rails is sort of magically behind the scenes, boom, creating that for us. In order to get the ID in there, we critically need to look at the documentation for this link to. So we could go off and say Rails link to, and there we go. That's the Rails. Is that slightly older? That's that API. Oh, I think I quite like the getting started with Rails format myself, actually. We go and look at link to. There we go. So there's a whole series of different things there about how link to works. I think we are going to need 6127. I think this one is maybe not going to show this various alternative link to things there, is it? I think it's, yeah, unfortunately we're going to have to go to the, one of the things that annoys me slightly about the Rails documentation, what I loved about the PHP documentation and the MySQL documentation back in the day was that any developer could edit and add examples. It was just awesome. I loved PHP for that. Rails, for some reason, I mean, I guess anybody can submit and add stuff through a pull request to Rails, but I think that just raises the bar, and so you just get far fewer of those things. But so if we look at link to, which is this one, and we look at here, we see that link to has name, default to nil, options default to nil, HTML options default to nil, and the option of sending a block. So I've always found this really annoyingly confusing. Basically, I think if we want to get any kind of additional HTML classes, IDs, or attributes on the link, then we have to set this HTML options properly. The interesting thing here is sort of take this. What I also find somewhat annoying is it seems like, I'm not sure where HTML options is defined. Like, it tells us here what all the options are, but if we, HTML options, like all of these different things have HTML options. That's a button to, and it says this method accepts the method modifier. Yeah, there's like some special HTML options. Basically, what I think it is, if we go over here and we slap this in there, so we see this link to documentation. We have an optional title. We then have, I think these options here are what take in the movie spots. I think it maybe even that options has to be a hash. There's this process whereby you need to then pass something like ID. Oh, well, I guess that can we use the new? Sometimes ID. I mean, what we're going to call it title header. Is that right? Title header like that. But I have a feeling that that may even be wrong. But let's just remove that there and have a little go and see. So I'm going to go back over here. Have I still got the debugger set up? Let's just get rid of that for the moment. We don't really need the debugger at the moment, which I would get rid of by to copy and paste that in, like so. Okay, so we've got the debugger in there. We don't need the debugger. Let's go back to here and reload the page. And maybe Hammer will break. Let's see. Oh, am I running the server? So let's make the server, split the server up. Here we go. Right. So now, having made that change, I can kind of go in here and I can say inspect element on there. Ah, okay, yes. And that I was being pessimistic, but actually that did work. So we can see here now that this title header there is set correctly, and it's done so via this mechanism. We're passing an additional parameter here, which is actually, actually what's going on here, I think, if we're strict, is poetry mode is allowing us to get away with, is it something like this, I think? Like, I think we're actually doing this, if we're really strict about it. Like the link to, if we go and look at the, if we go and find the link to it again, it's, oh no, okay, sorry, right, so there's, the link to it has a number of different signatures that we can do there, yeah, so it's like, you can either pass it, URL options a hash, or just URL. So I was probably getting ahead of myself there. Yeah, I mean, you can pass it a hash if there's a series of, you can pass it a hash consisting of controller, methods, ID, and so on. Or it'll take a URL string, which I think it's what it gets in this case. And then we've got a hash. And poetry mode is allowing me to remove that, and it chooses the right one in this case. But there's definitely enough rope to hang yourself with here, I would say. Anyway, I hope that answers Johan's question. Vitalev is saying, can you talk a little bit about lazy loading in Ruby models when the request to the database actually happens, and how can we build our request and run it later in the other statements? I think, in general, you know, Ruby's doing its best to be lazy about everything, and Rails and Active Record are doing that. And I think, but it depends. I mean, I think as Armando showed in one of the lectures, or maybe will be showing in one of the lectures, like you can do a query on the database, and it kind of sort of sets the query up, and it's not, and you return like a list, and it's not until you actually enumerate through that list that you start pulling, actually hitting the database. And that depends, you know, on the ins and outs of the particular Active Records querying method that you're calling, and it's the kind of thing that I think rather than the API, the getting started on Rails, there's is there not a guide? Is there not an active? I think there's an Active Record. We're on 3.2 there. I think, yeah, the Active Record query interface is probably, so you've got things like eager loading associations and scopes, dynamic finders, and you know, this is you know, a good read. I mean, I'll paste that into the group chat there. The second part of the question from Vitalev is that how can we build our request and run it later in the other statement? So I'm not necessarily sure what Vitalev means by in the other statement there, but I'm guessing it's about, you know, we've got these different methods, or maybe I'm getting that wrong. Yeah, I mean, I would say in the first instance, you know, you don't want to be optimizing too soon. Like, you know, at this stage, I wouldn't be worrying about, you know, hitting the database, you know, with, you know, what's the word, with too much stuff. I think that the key thing really is to get something working, and I'd say more in this course, rather than worrying about optimizing Rails, let's work about having a good software and engineering practice of driving the creation of Rails code and Ruby code with tests. Now, I admit the way that we've got this homework set up basically just asks you to play with Rails, which is, you know, one way of starting off. But I think the key thing is that what you would end up seeing in your logs and also just in your Rails output is you can see when database calls take place, and you can see how long they, you know, they take. And I think part of the process of optimizing a Rails app will come later, and we will have a performance. I think it's the last assignment in the 169.2 course that comes after this one is all about optimizing database queries. and things like that. So we will get onto that and fix our guns. I mean, I think it's a relatively straightforward. Well, I mean, depending on how familiar you are with databases, it can be a relatively straightforward assignment. That last one, but yes, I mean, there is a even in this 12-week course, I think we'll only scratch the surface of many of these things, but we'll try and give you jump-off points to other materials where we can. Okay, well, we've been going, even with interruptions, we've been going for about an hour and a half. Yeah, are there any other questions on homework 2 or any other topics that we, related to the course? Trying to think. I guess what we could just do is we could just recap. We could take a quick look at the, how the forum boards are going. I think the TAs are hard at work there. There's a lot of, I think a lot of people are, we've got this require students to complete prerequisites, of course, before the course starts. We've added this, we've added this new week 0, week -1. We were certainly hoping to get people, completing more of the prerequisites. I think it's difficult. I know other people have suggested, you should put regular expressions in there. That would be great to have a review of that first. I mean, in some ways, where we want to, I guess, in MOOCdom, what would be nice would be to say, here are the other MOOC courses that you would ideally complete first before you come to this course. At the moment, I think with NX, we don't really have a way of requiring prerequisites like one would have in many academic institutions. And so Vitaly, questions on quiz 1. Looking forward to the next hangout. Yes, next hangout will be a good time to go through any outstanding questions on quiz 1. Paul, any concluding thoughts?
No, I think
We've covered some stuff. Yeah, good stuff. Thanks everyone in the hangout land there. I've been going through trying to make sure that I'm adding you to my acquaintances because I'm definitely want to stay in touch with everybody to the extent possible. Please do be posting, and do post in the Stack Exchange. I do try and take a look through there, at least once a day to see what's going on, trying to keep up with things. I'm having less time to hang out in the IRC chat recently, but I hope people are enjoying the course. I know, there are aspects of it that are not perfect. We're doing our best to fix them, and please do come and get involved. We do rely a lot on volunteers. If anybody wants to get more involved, you could be just posting, how do I get more involved? Tell us a suggestion of the thing that you need fixing, and we'll try and get you more involved. I think actually in particular, one of the things that I'm planning is I want to move everybody over to Slack for a chat system. We've been having trouble. We did have these Skype IRC bridges that kind of held our different community members together, particularly for the TAs. Actually, also I used to have the IRC chat that's embedded in the forums bridged to a Skype chat room, and that's now not working. But yeah, there's this chat tool that I'm enjoying recently called Slack, and I think I want to try and hopefully by by the fall we might be able to embed that into the system, and that might provide a smoother chat experience to the current IRC one, and it might also allow all of us to stay in. We'll see. Yeah, I know the IRC web chats, and it annoys me as well that it doesn't do. I think it's the what's the word? It's the lesser of two evils at the moment. We did try very hard to try and get it so that it could be minimized, and then, as I mentioned before, some changes in the edX framework broke our thing, and we're still working on that. And it's but yeah, if anybody wants to come and help us work on adjusting the chat and making it better, we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, great. Cool. And Martin saying he found his pair today. Fantastic. Yeah. Pepper and keep at it. I know it's tough. We have here the students at Makers Academy working hard to pair with each other as they're learning. Yeah. It is emotionally draining. I think that people are finding that it can be extremely valuable. There we go. Best of luck to everyone. We'll stop the broadcast there, and yeah.